Le Nissan Kick-Play 2025 a beaucoup de plus. Apple CarPlay intégré pour jouer vos tunes préférées, des fonctions avancées de sécurité, un rendement énergétique remarquable, puis même la petite odeur de char neuf qu'on aime tant. Tout ça en plus pour moins. Le Nissan Kick Play 2025 est le véhicule neuf le plus abordable au Québec. Achetez-le à partir de seulement 22 774 $, incluant un rabais à l'achat comptant de 2 600 $. Profitez de cette offre avantageuse chez votre concessionnaire dès maintenant. Jusqu'au 2 mars, des conditions s'appliquent. Détails chez Nissan.
We begin this hour of the program on Ste-Catherine Street. You know, when I think of Ste-Catherine Street, I often think of that quote by Yogi Berra. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. And I think Ste-Catherine Street may be the best of times and the worst of times. Now, let me give you a stat here. In July, Ste-Catherine Street, 111 of the 622 commercial spaces along that 11-kilometer stretch were unoccupied, for rent, or completely abandoned. So let's find out what's happening on Ste-Catherine Street. Glenn Castanheira joins us, Executive Director of Montreal Centre-Ville. Glenn, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Elias.
So why don't you explain, in your opinion, what is going on Ste-Catherine Street?
Well, there's lots going on, but first, let me just clarify one element. The stat you just referred to, which I will not comment on simply because it is not a reliable data. It's a publicity stunt from a real estate firm outside of Montreal who is really looking for attention and has done so with much success. Coming up with stats on an 11-kilometer street to determine the performance from a company that's not even present on the ground is not something that we rely on. We rely on data that we collect and that we collect from other of our partners that are serious real estate partners like CBRE, like Avis and Young and others.
So what's the data that you feel is reliable? Tell us what the data tells you from maybe more reliable sources.
So the correct data is first off, what you referred to, what you said, which is, nobody goes there, it's too crowded, is that foot traffic is up 30% compared to last year. This is in September alone. And there's actually more people on St. Catherine Street today than they were in 2019. And that's just for St. Catherine Street. That's not to say everything's back to wonderful times. It's to say that we're generating more foot traffic than there are people living, for example, in Quebec City on one single street. Corner McGill in St. Catherine, it's roughly 90,000 people per day that walk on that intersection. So when it goes to vacancy now, the vacancy that we see on St. Catherine Street reflects what we see elsewhere. It's an international phenomenon that's ongoing. There's a cycle. We're roughly right now between 17 and 18% on the downtown core of St. Catherine Street, not 11 kilometers, which is a ridiculous sample, but on the 3-kilometer stretch between, which you could look at being de la Montagne and Robert Bourassa, which is the crunch of it.
Glenn, listen, I just wanted to point something out. The stat that I quoted was 17.8%. Now, I get your point, right? The longer stretch, but it was the same percentage, right? You said 17, 18%. That's bang on where we were.
But again, it's just that I don't want to make it a habit of giving credibility to something that's not credible. That's my only point.
Okay.
But I'm happy to discuss the situation of downtown and of our street. I mean, broken clock is right twice a day. It just so happens that this broken clock gave a number that makes sense now, but tomorrow they'll say something completely different. And I don't want to make this a habit.
So Glenn, you know me and the fact that I've been downtown. I go downtown, right? And I've been on those packed streets. I've seen people like say, nobody's going downtown. And I'm like, well, the streets are packed often, okay? Having said that, I'm going to read you one text message from a listener, and I'll give you a story from this program from this week. So here's John in Dorval, and he writes this. Elias, I want to give you my recent experience on St. Catherine Street. I went to an izakaya with a friend. While walking back to our car around 10 p.m., I had a homeless person come up to me shaking a cup. I said, sorry, I don't have any change. The person laughed at me and told her friends he thinks I want change, turns to me and says, I want bills, paper money. I was taken aback and I walked away. This is near Fort Street. And then 2 days ago on this program, we spoke to this photographer And maybe you saw this story. This photographer who had 10 years' work stolen from his car right around the Bay, the Hudson's Bay Company, in downtown Montreal. And their car was broken into. They lost all their hard drives, all their laptops, okay? So, those are the stories, and it may be anecdotal, but we keep hearing stories of parts of downtown Ste-Catherine Street being, not up to a point that I think a lot of us want to see it at.
And that is a fact. I want to point out that it's not just anecdotes. It's hard to come out with hard data on that. We are actually conducting a study now, as we speak, to hopefully shed some light on this phenomenon that we're seeing downtown. Montreal in its downtown remains one of the safest downtowns in North America, some say even in the world. We believe those data, but we really want to, there's clearly something happening. And most of these issues, for example, the ones that you quoted, are not made public for many reasons. On one end, of course, we don't want to publicize these issues on our end because it's bad publicity. We hear that a lot, right? A lot of our businesses don't want to talk about these issues because it gives out possibly a bad image. You also have the issue of it being taboo to say that you've been a victim of an issue, especially when it concerns homeless populations. The example of the gentleman, that had someone ask him for money, that's peanuts compared to some other issues that we hear of people being harassed. I mean, we're talking about a minority of these people that are vulnerable in the street that are violent, but the fact is that there's a lot of mental health issue, and there's a lot of drug use that hinders them unpredictable. And this is a phenomenon that's growing. We're nowhere near what we see in LA, Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, but you've heard me say this before, and I'll say it again. We don't want to wait to get there.
Yes. No, and I couldn't agree more, right? It is actually really important. I think one of the most important questions in life is compared to what? So, Montreal, downtown is dangerous. Well, then you say compared to what exactly? Yeah. And then you can talk about all the other cities and issues here. Let me ask you this. Let me throw this at you. There's also competition. Some would say, hey, Royal Mount, high end, and there's a lot of high end shops, but there's a lot of shops that I wouldn't necessarily say are high end, Zara and H&M and the like, and that kind of thing. So, what about Royal Mount? Could Royal Mount be competition for that foot traffic that Ste-Catherine relies on?
It is a bit of a competition, but probably not in a sense that your listeners may think of. You may think, Zara opens in Montreal Mount, so it's competition for Zara downtown. That's not the actual competition. The main risk for downtown when it comes to projects like Royal Mount are exclusivity deals. That means a company, a brand that will open in that property will sign an exclusivity that says they are not allowed to open anywhere else in a radius of 20, 30, 40, 50 kilometers. And that's the real risk. So a new brand like Uniqlo opened downtown Montreal, right? If there was an exclusivity deal with Royal Mount, then we wouldn't have them downtown. Now, that's the main risk. Otherwise, the biggest risk really is for other peripheral shopping malls, like Fairview Pointe-Claire, like Rockland, of course, like Marché Central, and even Carrefour Laval. They're the ones that are really going to feel the bite of it. Because, again, when we talk about the clientele that we do see downtown, let's not forget we host roughly 10 to 11 million visitors from outside of Quebec yearly. That's more than the entire population of Quebec. Not a lot of people are going to buy a plane ticket to come to Montreal to go visit a mall. Just the same way that when you go to New York, have you been to the mega mall in New Jersey, which is the second largest mall in the U.S.? I don't think so.
Probably your first pick would probably be Fifth Avenue.
And there you go, which, mind you, has a 25% vacancy rate right now as we speak.
Glenn, listen, it's always great talking to you and getting your perspective. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Cheers.
That's Glenn Castanheira, Executive Director of Montreal Centre-Ville.